Okay, Mark, so thank you for doing this. The first question is to try to give an idea of who you are and how you lived your life. Tell us where you were born and where you are now, and maybe some anecdotal stories that connect the two things.
So where I started, where I've landed so far, and what's in between, I understand well. Thanks first of all, Mauro, for inviting me to join. I think that it's actually quite surprising, frankly, to me, where I am and where I started, because they're the same place. So I'm sitting right now in the city of Berkeley, California, in the USA. And I was born and I grew up in the city of Berkeley in California in the USA. And it's strange because I've lived many places and traveled to many countries in between. Yeah, so it's a strange journey, but working out all right so far. The reason I grew up in this city is there's a big university at Berkeley that many people have heard of, the University of California, Berkeley, and my family lived here from before I was born because my father was a professor at that university. And so I grew up in an academic family, but personally, I was very committed to athletics. So I thought I was quite a big athlete. And I actually, one of the unexpected turns in my life is that I actually left university to pursue a full-time athletic career when I was 19 years old. 18 or 19 years old, in a field that is, I know you live in Brazil. I don't think it's a big Brazilian sport, unfortunately, which is alpine skiing. So I was an alpine ski racer.
Wow.
In my youth, and I achieved some success. I was at my peak. I was ranked number 23 in my event in the United States. So not in the world, but in the United States. But I had multiple injuries. I had concussion. I had back problems. I had knee surgeries. And so I was forced to retire and go back to university and finish my degree in English. So I was a literature student and a writer of fiction myself. My senior thesis at the university was a small novel. So that also tells you that I'm interested in how we write the language. But I also have very high standards for myself in writing, which is not always helpful. Sometimes it freezes and paralyzes me. But anyway, I won't give you the whole journey, but along the way, I thought I would be an English teacher, a literature teacher, but I got excited about business and the opportunities that business can create for people to improve their lives. And then I went and got an MBA. And all of these journeys, skiing, I traveled around the world. I competed in different countries. My MBA was not in California. It was on the East Coast. My undergraduate degree was also in the East Coast of the U.S. And at big American universities. And strangely enough, where I had grown up, which was the San Francisco Bay Area, is the center and was the center of technology because it's the Silicon Valley. So I ended up back here because not because I was going to be an academic, but because I was going to be a businessman. Exactly, pursuing business in web companies and different tech companies. And then strangely, in the last few years, I've started teaching, and now I'm back at that university where my father started, which was not my intention. That was not my plan. But here I am teaching at the College of Engineering, teaching entrepreneurship and innovation in the engineering school. So I can't make sense of it myself. There were many stops, but somehow I've ended up back where I started.
Such a rich story, Mark. I didn't know about any of this, so it was very interesting to hear. Before the question that I had in mind, something came up with what you said, and I'm curious. Do you think that past as a professional athlete influences or qualifies you in a different way for entrepreneurship? Like, do you see a connection in between the challenges of being a professional athlete and the skills and the competence that are required for to be an entrepreneur?
Mauro, you know me well enough to know that I like to give long answers, but I will give you a very short one. The short answer is yes. And not only yes, but absolutely yes. I think in so many ways, and I'll only mention a couple. I mean, my particular sport, I was a specialist in the discipline of downhill ski racing. So within ski racing, there's slalom with many turns, and there's giant slalom and super giant slalom, and then there's the downhill, which is the fastest and the riskiest. And in my specialty, there's just a lot of risk of injury. And I said I was injured. I crashed and injured my back. I crashed and injured my head. I crashed and injured my knees. And there's, in order to succeed, you have to be very close to the limit of what you can do in order to compete and succeed. But that means there's a risk. There's a risk that you'll fall. And if you fall, there's a risk that you'll be injured. And one of the things I learned from my particular sport, was that the key isn't to be stupid and reckless, right? The winners are not the ones who are reckless. The winners are the ones who understand the risk and control it. And I think that applies very much in entrepreneurship, because I think in entrepreneurship, there's always going to be a risk of failure, but understanding that risk and managing it to maximum benefit, to sort of find the line between being reckless and being aggressive but controlled, is something in my particular sport that I saw. But even beyond that, just the notion of competition and how to be as good as you can be. I happen to compete in an individual sport, but all of the team sports, which I played what we in the US we call soccer and you call football. I was terrible in the field, so I was a goalkeeper for my school when I was.
I was a goalkeeper too, and I was not a bad one.
Yeah, I was not a bad one. I was not a great one, but I was named the #1 goalkeeper in my league, in the league of my school. As it turns out, my school was in a very, very bad league. So I was the best goalkeeper in the worst league of the schools. But I'm sure you were far, far better than I was. But I mean, all of the things about teamwork and competition and all of those things, I think, are lessons. I think sports give us great lessons and also useful metaphors for many parts of life, and particularly entrepreneurship. So
you said now, I'm going to get another question outside the script. Is just like this. It's interesting. You talk about being reckless, like the winners are not the ones that are reckless. It's so interesting how you can measure this tendency to be reckless, for example, by the amount of testosterone that you have, or that you get,
right,
during moments of stress, right? So in a competition, those that can there's a kind of threshold of testosterone that makes you reckless, and these are the pilots that crash the car because they could not control the risk. So of course, if you are below a threshold of testosterone, you never get any risk.
Right.
But
you never start.
Too much of it.
Yep.
If you get too much of it, then you become reckless. So there's that range of testosterone that helps you run controlled risks.
I think there are multiple body chemicals, testosterone and adrenaline, and all of these things, and finding a path, and frankly rehearsing. The other thing about sports that people, I think, undervalue in the rest of life is, I'll tell you one of the things. It's an example I use, which is people say to me when I say, "Oh, I teach entrepreneurship and innovation." People say, "Oh, this cannot be taught. You cannot teach entrepreneurship." And I say, "Well, that's crazy. First of all, you can teach anything, but what are you teaching?" And the metaphor I use is I say, "Look, some people in the world have a natural ability to run faster than others. Let's say sprinters in a sprint or marathon, doesn't matter, but let's say sprinting. So if I'm a sprinter, I might naturally be a faster sprinter than somebody else, and there's somebody yet again who's faster than me. But that's the natural starting point. And then no world-class sprinter or not even world-class, no competitive sprinter at any level, starting from youth sports, would go into a sprinting race without training, without a coach, without practice, and with all these things. And so we practice not only the specific skills, but also the softer skills, like how to manage your the anxiety, the testosterone level, the adrenaline level. I used to have a skiing coach who said, Mark, you need to work on controlling your anxiety. Because, you know, if you're too anxious, if you're extremely anxious, you're paralyzed and you can't move. If you're too anxious, then you can't make fast decisions because you're analyzing. All of these things are things that we can practice and train. And I think sports, again, give us a very convenient metaphor, because nobody would imagine in any sport that just because you have a natural ability, you wouldn't also practice and study. And it's the same in entrepreneurship. Some people are more naturally inclined to the activities of the entrepreneur, but that doesn't mean that everybody can't practice and get better by rehearsing and by studying. So anyway, that's my view. I'm sure it doesn't surprise you.
Yes, no, well, I fully agree. And one of the points that I think about it, it's practice. You know, like to be a professional athlete, you have to understand. You will eventually understand the value of practicing, and yes, there is this genetic component that for sure, you know, like not everyone can be Usain Bolt, but
Right.
for those who can, they are not going to get there without practice. So you have this, let's say, it's a way of putting the nature and nurture aspects.
Yeah.
So with all these experiences that you have, that all these interesting things that you did, when you look at the world today, do you think the world is better or worse than it was before?
It's a very provocative question, Mauro, and I think I have my simple answer and my complicated answer. And my simple answer is I think it's better. I do think the world is getting better. But I also think it's important that we should say the answer is always both. And when I say always, I mean throughout history, as we improve things, as we learn as a species and as a society, while we learn, other things are also happening. We learn and we get better, and we have more ways for people to accomplish things, more ways that people can create a life for themselves. So, you know, you just look at medicine. It's like, it's unbelievable the advances we can do. People can be alive today who would never have lived this long in any time earlier, even 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, because it doesn't matter, you know, which treatments you have. I mean, it's funny, I'm sitting here right now and I said I've had all these surgeries. I mean, I've had, you know, I have recovered from knee surgeries. Right now I have knee replacements. So I have artificial metal knees in both of my legs. And I also recovered from a ruptured appendix, you know, where I would have died if they didn't know how to do the advanced surgery, you know, and so in so many ways it's better. But some of those technologies that can help us make the world better, we also use to kill each other, right? We also use in certain ways to exacerbate problems like inequality of opportunity. And so there are big problems in the world. And you could say, while the world overall, if you net everything out, I think, yeah, the world's better than it used to be. But, you know, just because we can say that in the macro sense, at the level of certain individuals or certain groups or certain countries, you know, I would argue that while there's progress overall for the whole world, some people are worse off. And that's not something we should ignore. So when you say, is the world a better place? I would probably, if we weren't actually recording this, say, whose world? My world, or the world of other people whose lives are being harmed by things that could be helping them, or that we aren't using to help them. So I worry about it, Mauro. I worry that we're leaving people behind. And while we make the world overall a better place, that for some of us, it's getting worse. So I hope that doesn't piss you off as an answer.
No,
because I know you're a
it doesn't.
natural optimist yourself.
But look, I don't remember who said that, but the quote is, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed."
That's a good line. I
So
like that one. Yeah.
yeah, we have to check who said it to give the proper credit. And of course, I agree with you, and it's very sad that some problems that could have been solved haven't been yet. So I can give maybe an example to illustrate. Like I resent that my city that is so beautiful still have some pollution problems that are so easy to fix. I'm not talking about, like technology that was invented 5 years ago. This is how to treat organic matter, like
Right.
we know how to do it for a century. It's
Right.
not even expensive to do it. It's just like decide to do it, and it would make everyone's life so much better. At the same time, I read this very interesting article about Kuznets curves. I don't know if you know the term. It's an economic modeling kind of framework, and these guys applied this to the environment, and they realized that before the per capita income of a country is until it doesn't reach like $4,000 per capita, the society don't start demanding a clean environment. So and you have all these, of course, in between, right? So why they don't do this? Why they don't see the connection in between, like health and a cleaner environment? So it's clear that it's not a priority, but if it was, it could solve many of the other problems that are around.
Yeah.
You talked about these challenges, the challenge. So the world is overall better, but you still see a lot of challenges. And could you list 1 to 3 of the challenges for us to explore a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I alluded to one that I think continues to present a problem, and you alluded to another one. One that I think is a problem that sort of continues to, I think, frustrate me globally. I mean, we're talking at the sort of macroeconomic and level, but it's very personal for the people who are suffering. Is this notion of inequality of opportunity? I mean, we maintain this fiction in the United States that, everybody has an even start, and if you have talent and you work hard, you have the opportunity to succeed. It's not true. I mean, the evidence has showed that, certain advantages. I mean, I have a lot of advantages because, structurally, I'm a white guy who came from a stable family and had access to education that someone who had the same, innate intelligence or something, however we measure that. And in fact, the way we measure it has biases too. So there's this inequality of opportunity for people to thrive and to accomplish, I think is frustrating. And you've alluded to this problem of, our society and our economies produce a lot of waste. And we haven't figured out how to, I mean, we can use the word recycle, but it's like recycle has come to mean something very specific, but we just haven't figured out a good way to avoid having the output, the waste from our activities, essentially spoil portions of the place we live, right? You said in your city, there's portions of your city that are so dirty and it's not difficult or impossible to solve. And we have the technology, but somehow we have the technology, we really have the resources, we sort of don't have the will collectively, or the will is in the wrong places somehow. And then that points to the larger issue of the human impact on climate change, which threatens, apparently, I mean, again, I certainly am not a climate expert, but from everything I read, it seems to really threaten our ability to continue to live where we live. So those are three. I could keep going, but I think inequality of opportunity. What do we do with our waste from our economic activities in a way that's less destructive, and then that leads to this sort of overarching question of climate change and climate mitigation. So is that enough for you, Mauro? That seems like
it
big.
is. It is. I
It
was
seems like too much already. I just
no,
depressed myself.
the next question would be how the professional choice that you make, how do you connect the professional choice that you made with one of these challenges? You know, like if you see contributing to one of them, but maybe I'll be more specific in your case, because I want to pick something that you said, that if recycling, and let's see if I understood it right, or if I'm getting something that it's my opinion. I think we produce too much stuff that we don't need. And it's maybe a flaw of business model, right? And I hesitate to think that this is a problem of capitalism, because I understand capital as the accident of things that you can produce when you specialize too much. So because you specialize it so much, you get very efficient. So over unity of time, you produce something that we call capital that can grow in value in a way where you can change this excedent of production for other stuff. But in a world where or in an economic system that I'm not sure if we should call capitalism, but we seem to live in an economic framework that to get things cheaper, we need to produce too many of them, like more than necessary. And then you need to create a fictional or you need to convince people that they need these things that they don't, so you can justify the production. And I know you are a guy connected with entrepreneurship and innovation, so I am going to extend the question of how does your professional choice connects with these challenges that you see ahead, to ask you do you think business models can change? If you know, like we have place or we have opportunity for business models that are so disruptive, that are going to change these kind of very inefficient ways of producing. The question got so complicated.
It's okay. No, I can parse it. I mean, as you said, and as we've alluded, my professional choice in the current moment. I mean, I made the choice in earlier times. I spent 20 years running a series or running either. I wasn't always the CEO, but either the CEO or the COO of 8 different companies over 20 years in startup world. And some of those were had a social component and some did not, in terms of creating social impact. But I think two larger points. One is you ask, so in my current professional choice, where I teach people to launch new businesses, and I teach them how to do that more efficiently and more effectively. So why do I do that in the face of the problems I identified? Well, I believe that economic activity, so the creation of new businesses, can create value for the consumers, the customers who use the output from those businesses. So if I create a business that, I don't know, enhances agricultural production, then we've increased the efficiency of agricultural production. So we're getting output, and and then people are benefiting, and the people who work in my company are benefiting because they have new jobs, and then the people who are getting the benefit of what our company does, they're getting a benefit, and that this helps improve the world further, right? We can make in the great sort of joke of Silicon Valley, of the HBO Silicon Valley show, it's like, my startup makes the world a better place. So I think startups really can But you've hit on something else, which is there is this problem that we overproduce, and then overproduction sucks up resources to do that production. The excess output is wasted, and this is across all industries. I mean, whether it's clothing or whether it's food production, we're throwing away food while other people are going hungry. So somehow in our system, there's this massive inequality, and yet I tend to believe in a lot of aspects of capitalism to create value and create something good. So what's missing? And I think that there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of small things or small or large things that add up to a problem that I think we need to address at a larger societal level. And that is, one of those is really understanding costs. So right now you said in order to get things cheaply, in your statement, which was leading up to your question, you said in order to get things cheaply, we have to make a lot of them. And that's true, but then making a lot of them is consuming resources or affecting resources where those costs aren't actually built into the price of the product. So the example that people give in climate science, is like, well, I'm polluting the river next to my factory, but I'm not paying in any way for that. This is a standard model, right? So it's like I'm creating destruction for people. I'm harming the world, but I'm not actually paying any price for that. Now, who could enforce a price? Who could charge you money for that is an interesting question. And the natural place we would go is, government, city, regional, city, county, provincial, state, federal. But taxation may not be the only way to impose costs that reflect the real cost of production. But there ought to be some way that our capitalist system can regulate the production so that we don't overproduce and create all this waste, which is doubly destructive, because it's not only that then we have to deal with the waste itself, and that's the excess food that's rotting and creating methane gas that's exacerbating climate change. It's also that we've used energy. It's like we've used energy to produce food. We've used energy and water to produce food that's going to waste, while some kilometers away, there is somebody who needs that energy, that water, and that food, right? So people are hungry, and you're sort of like, well, this is crazy. So there's a craziness, and my professional choice is to say I can have impact today by helping people start businesses. But if you really go through the way I teach entrepreneurship, I really don't emphasize, and I try not to work with entrepreneurs who come and say, I am doing this primarily to get rich. If you're doing it primarily to get rich, that's an issue for me. If you're doing it primarily to create value and capture some value for yourself, like I'm not asking anybody to just work for nothing, right? That's not it. But let's really create products and services. And you know this because you were my student once. We talk about what is the value proposition, not for yourself, but what is the value proposition you can deliver to somebody else? And if I can teach more and more people to think that way, to think about creating value for we call them customers, or we call them partners, or we call them stakeholders, but creating value for others as the means to create value for yourself, instead of just exploiting others to create value for yourself. That's my little sort of what I'll call subversive side of how I teach entrepreneurship, which is let us focus on value creation. And that's my hope, is that when I die, that at the end, I will have had some net positive impact on the world by helping people think that way. That's my hope.
Let me, this is going to be a question based on a personal doubt or something that I am exploring. So when you say that taxation it's not the only way to try to compensate, let's call compensate in just in absence of maybe a better word, the environment. I've been looking at different systems of incentive. right? Because I think that when you need to regulate something or tax, it's because maybe you don't have a proper positioning of the incentives. The
I
right
agree with that.
incentives are not in the right place. If
In
they were,
general, yeah, in general, I
then
agree with that concept. Yeah.
yes. And I've been looking at different systems of consensus and governance based on blockchain that try to address
Right.
that have the potential to redistribute these incentives. And the idea of rules without rulers, it's becoming so tempting to me, because
Right.
you can do two things with this. One, have a governance for complex systems of incentives, maybe with too many, like lots of stakeholders, and incentives that have to be very small or very very big, and distribute value for all these complicated networks of stakeholders. This is the first aspect. And the second aspect is man, I lost now. It will come back to me.
Yeah, no problem.
But how do you see this? Like, are your students thinking about this distribution of incentives, or how do you see these questions of? I remember the second topic. Okay, it's the idea that a small group of people cannot subvert the rules for their personal profit. Let's say also profit, in the lack of a better word, because I believe a lot of these inequalities that you mentioned as a problem, they are the result of system that you can corrupt. Okay, so eventually someone will use their influence to prevent their losses or to gain some specific benefit. And we can maybe even use the freedom of the slaves as an example. Like when slaves were set free and were promised to get land, and I know this happened in the US, but also in Brazil.
Right.
Who end up getting the land were the slave owners, in kind of reparation for their financial losses. So this is absurd. But in a blockchain system, you would never be able to do this, like to promise one thing, to code one thing, and then to ignore this rule, or even to turn the rule upside down to benefit different parties.
So I'll make a joke and say, yeah, if only at the time that each of our countries were ending the enslavement of enslaved people, if only we had blockchain. No, I mean, look, I think that regardless of the technical way, the technical method, and you're talking about blockchain as one potential way to hold, what you're talking about is using a newish technology as a way to prevent the corruption of systems.
Of a
And the way
system
you
of
prevent
rules.
the corruption of systems when it comes to human systems is by essentially holding people to account. Like and to make it really just like in 2 words, is prevent lying, right? And it could be lying that was intentional lying at the beginning, or lying that turns out to be lying because you said one thing and you meant it when you said it, but then later you decide, I didn't really mean that, or I changed my mind, right? And it prevents it because we've got this immutability. And I know that, that's one of the big selling points of blockchain. I laugh because I actually worked in an immutable data integrity. So making data tamper evident was one of my startups that actually did not have a great outcome. It had a medium outcome, or medium to negative but it was very many years ago. It was too early. It was, it was before people got excited. We were doing a chain hashing and essentially a version, a sort of private blockchain concept inside enterprises before the
I think
popularization of
it's
blockchain.
still too. I think it's still the market is still not ready for this.
No, I agree. I agree. Well, I mean, certain aspects of the market are not, and that's an interesting
Yes.
question: is what's going to be required for that? So I think that you've hit on these two things, which is the corruptibility of the systems coupled with perversity of incentives. So we create incentives that are going to motivate. If you really analyze the incentives, that are going to motivate behavior that
Bad
ultimately will be
behavior.
harmful. Right? It's
Yeah.
bad behavior. And so I think looking at there's two, I'll say, aspects to solving these problems. One is looking at systems more broadly, because one of the things we tend to do is to optimize a very local, very narrow set of circumstances without a view to, and I hate to say a bigger picture, but a broader set of constraints. And so we see this, in our personal lives where, in the US, there's a very popular sort of local social network called Nextdoor, and each neighborhood has its own little mini social network. And I live in Berkeley, which is a very liberal city politically at the macro level. It's like, oh yeah, we support all these progressive causes. But then you look on Nextdoor for my neighborhood in Berkeley, and everybody's very upset about some local thing where it's like, come on, you're harming the larger society to protect your local interest. And that narrowness of view leads to the embracing of the incentives that I think are misplaced. The larger corruptibility of the systems we live in, I think we need multiple layers of solutions. Saying that we're going to instantiate the rules of society on the blockchain is one part of it. But I also think we need to think differently about education. I think we need to think differently about how we talk about things and how we measure success. And frankly, whom we reward with time and attention, not just wealth, but also time and attention. Like why is it that we spend billions of pick your favorite currency, dollars, euros, whatever, popularizing, the love lives of celebrities who have never created anything, but just what they've created is their own lives as a form of entertainment. Like I've never fully understood why that's so entertaining, but then people make money from it, and then we've got this perverse incentive that promotes more people to do it, and now people are going to game that system because there's a system to be gamed. So I do think there's we should be I encourage us to continue. Should is a tough word there, but I would hope that we can, continue to interrogate these things. You asked briefly in passing, Mauro, about my students, and I will say that right now, when I work with university students, as compared to quite recently, as compared to even 10 years ago or 5 years ago, even in this short time frame, there is an increasing awareness of the idea of creating for-profit. So not creating, not-profit NGOs, but a for-profit companies with a positive social impact. So how am I going to make money from remediating poverty in developing nations? And I've worked with entrepreneurs in developing nations in Brazil and developing nation in parts of the developing economy. I consider parts of Brazil's economy to be developing. I recently spoke with an entrepreneur who's doing something really interesting in Kenya. I've got teams I've worked with in India. So there's places where that component of the enterprise, beyond just increasing the stock of the price of my stock and the valuation of my next venture capital round, I do think that there's an increased awareness of not just climate issues, but also inequality issues. And I just hope we can start to move towards a more productive set of incentives, to get back to your point about incentives. So
Great. So before we close the 3 rapid fire questions, let's see if you can, how long are going to be your answers? So the first is simple. Even though looking at the shelf behind you, what is the book that you're reading right now?
So I always try to have 2 books that I'm reading, one that's related to business generally and one that's more for my personal. So my business book, actually, I just finished. So I need to get one. I just finished reading this, the Bad Blood about Elizabeth Holmes and her misadventures
Wow.
at Theranos, because she's on
Yeah,
trial, and so I
the
wanted
trial is
to
starting. Yeah.
I wanted
Well, I
to
saw
have the
the
latest.
documentary. It's
So yeah, I saw
definitely
the
a lot of lessons
documentary.
there.
And so I just finished that, so I need to start a new one. And then my personal book I'm reading is a book by a comedian, an American comedian, a woman comedian called Amber Ruffin. And she wrote a book called You Won't Believe What Happened to Lacey. And it's actually, of all things, it's going to sound crazy when I say it, it's a comedic view of racism in America. So if you can imagine such a thing. So
Yes. The second question is, do you take long or short lunch breaks?
I take short lunch breaks.
Short lunch breaks. The third question is going to relate to something that we already talked about. Bitcoin, are you a believer or a non-believer?
So there's 3 layers to that question, and I'm going to answer them in order. One is, one is blockchain, one is cryptocurrency on the blockchain, and then the third element is Bitcoin as a specific cryptocurrency. In reverse order, I mean, I do think that the popularization and the widespread adoption, or increasingly widespread adoption of blockchain, will open up new avenues for human activity that we haven't had before, because it promises, and we'll see how the promise plays out, it promises to improve accountability by retaining history for all time. Cryptocurrency within the blockchain, I think, has a very bright future. I'm actually a believer that all currencies are only valuable because a group of people have agreed that they're valuable. They're valuable because we as humans, it's what philosophers have called a social fact, or the fact that money is valuable is a social fact. It's not a fact of physics, right? It's not a natural fact. So the idea that we are going to create currencies that are not determined, whose value is not determined at governments, but are actually a non-governmental or a super governmental collection of people will make that decision. I believe that's just going to happen. I don't know how long it will take, but I think this notion of currency, not nationally defined, but defined by a non-nation state population, is a fact that we're all going to have to adapt to and deal with, because it's just going to be real. Now, the question of Bitcoin as a particular instance of cryptocurrency, I'm going to frustrate you by saying I don't know. I mean, it was sort of the first most popular. Does that mean it'll be the one as opposed to other, sort of altcoin cryptocurrencies that aren't Bitcoin? I guess if I needed to bet today, I would say sure, but I don't need to bet today. That's what's wonderful. I can wait. So I think I'm not a true passionate believer in Bitcoin as the most promising instantiation of cryptocurrency, but I am a believer in the concept of non-governmental definition of a valuable currency.
Great. You went to the second derivative of my question and the third derivative of it.
And I apologize. I'm sorry if that was too complicated.
No, it was great.
For the purposes of what's supposed to be an entertaining podcast, I think I just put everybody to sleep. But that's how I think about it, and for better or worse. So.
But that's great. What I'm trying to do is to kind of at first to have a pool. Like, are people aware of this? Do they think about it? And
yeah, I think about it.
for the purpose of the objective of the question, it was fully answered. So where would you like us to send people to learn more about you or what you're doing? And would you have some specific demand, like what people could do to help in the mission that you are trying to accomplish, so we can tell them this, let them
Okay,
know?
sure. I mean, as it turns out, my primary intranet presence or active internet presence is on is three layers, really: LinkedIn, and then Twitter next to that. And so those are where you find me online. I will say I have a personal annoyance, which is on LinkedIn when people connect with me without telling me how they know me or why they want to connect with me. When I get a request from someone I've literally never heard of, and they say, I would like to join your LinkedIn network, and I have no idea how they heard about me, why they're interested. So I do like it if people say, I heard about you in this connection, let's connect. At least I have some concept. That's one thing. I do share my opinions occasionally on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. We do have, as you know, I have these two lives. I have my life inside the University of California, Berkeley, and I have my life outside, which is the Innovation Acceleration Group, which we abbreviate as IAG. And IAG has the mission of promoting entrepreneurship and corporate innovation globally. And so the way that people can help me and IAG's mission is if you are, or if you know people who are trying to promote an entrepreneurial ecosystem in your region. And in fact, Mauro, you and I met because of a partnership back in 2017, I think, with Copiaggi Business School in Rio and IAG. So if people have either knowledge of or are part of an organization that wants to promote entrepreneurship and promote the launching of innovative new businesses, then I would want them to help me make those connections so that we can spread our work even more broadly than we are today.
Amazing, Mark. Thank you so much for doing this.
I hope that my answers were clear, and that I didn't go too long. You'll have to edit me down to make it shorter, so that it'll fit in your time frame. So, but that's okay.